Every successful change starts with a clear story. And how you tell that story, especially the words you choose, can strengthen or sabotage your message. That's where plain language comes in. I recorded a conversation with my friend and colleague, Lynda Harris. She's founder and chief executive of Write, as part of my Conversation on Change series. Our conversation may be a few years old and pre-COVID. However, the insights are still relevant today. And so I decided to share it with you. Have a listen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Conversations on Change. I am so delighted you've taken the time to view this video. Today's topic, plain language. You may be thinking, what does plain language have to do with organizational change? Well, actually, quite a lot. Because the ability for you to tell your story, to connect with people, to avoid conflict and misunderstandings all comes down to the way you communicate, and plain language can help. I'm really pleased today to introduce you to Lynda Harris. Lynda has been showing businesses since 1989 that writing clearly is essential for their success. She's president and owner of Write Limited. Write Limited is recognized as a market leader in plain language. Welcome, Lynda.
Hi, Dawn Marie, and thank you so much for inviting me. Everybody loves to talk about their favourite subject, so I'm pretty thrilled to be here. And look, you gave me a wonderful introduction, so I think, I'm ready just to have a chat.
Perfect. Well, then why don't we start right at the very beginning and talk about what is plain language and why does it matter?
So that's a great question. And I think most people have a view of plain language already, and they tend to think that it's just the words, just all about the words. We take a much broader view than that. So we see plain language as if a document is written in plain language, it uses every element that it takes to connect with that reader and have them be able to understand quickly and be able to act on that communication. So that's things, obviously it is the words, but it's also the structure of the communication, it's the presentation, it's having an awareness of the reader. So that there's actually so much to it. And the second thing you asked me was why it matters. Well, this is the best question, because when you think about it, in every organization, people are writing. So when I was first in business, I used to sort of look around from my office window and I saw, hundreds of other office windows, and I would think every single one of those windows has got people in there at their desks and they are writing and they are being paid to write. So therefore there is a cost to writing. There's a salary cost, and then there's all the subsequent costs that come from that. And most people in most organizations don't think about that. They don't realize that what they're paying for is an awful lot of writing. So if people write well, that organization is going to get much more value from their investment in their staff. So writing and the quality of writing absolutely impacts on an organization's bottom line. It reaches out into every activity in that organization. It reaches out into the culture of the organization. So that was a big, long-winded answer, but as you can see, we are very passionate about the fact that writing underpins the success of an organization.
I think you said it best, Lynda, in your book when you said every word comes with a price tag. We tend to forget about that, right? But every word we choose really demonstrates what our organization is about in the way that, and then has a cost to it.
Yes, absolutely. There's something else I remember now that I put in the book, and it's a fantastic quote by a colleague of ours, Simon Hertman. And he says, words need to get onto the balance sheet and into the boardroom.
The other quote that I really liked in your book, if I can refer to it, I think you said many organizations care less for their readers the more they communicate. And that was, and then the whole concept of reader-centric. And I thought that was a really powerful statement, because for me, many leaders, the more they communicate, they intuitively think that people will see that they care more. But what you're really saying is that the busier we get, the more we start putting out emails and other communication, the less time we're actually taking to think about the way that written communication is being read and heard.
Yes, so true. I think we've got a little graph in the book that talks about what happens to the quality of communication over time. And in that example, we were particularly talking about the client-customer relationship, but it happens just as much internally. And in fact, perhaps even more, because we are so used to our colleagues around us, we don't necessarily take the care with them at all. So you're absolutely right. And I think you only have to think about the number of times you got an email, you responded, and the person said, no, that's not what I meant, or, could you please? And they're asking for something and you think you've already answered it. And yes, that quality definitely can diminish over time unless you have the reader at heart. And you mentioned reader-centric. I know you also have a model.
I do, actually. We approach change from what I call a change recipient-centric perspective,
Right.
which means that when you look at the changes that are going to be required, when you look at what is the journey, you look at it from the people that have to make the journey, that have to switch desks or learn new technology or develop new habits, versus from an organizational context of what it means for you. And so the whole idea is to put that change recipient, that person or that group of people into the center, and then begin to ask different questions. What does it look like for them? How big is it for them? What will it feel like for them? And I think your reader-centric or reader-focused is similar.
It's a complete match. Absolutely. I mean, we talk about putting yourselves in the shoes of the reader. We help people to create perhaps even a little quick reader profile, or preferably a persona if you are an organization that is writing something that's going to go out to many people. Of course, not everyone is the same. So looking, at the different groups that you would have in your organization, and as you say, how a communication will affect them, we really advocate the use of personas to do that. Where are you familiar with that term? You do it, yeah. So yes, look, I just couldn't agree more, and I think that so often as writers we are so consumed by what we want to get across, what we need people to do, what we need to tell them, or why didn't they do a thing. And we just completely forget that in most cases when we're communicating, we actually do want someone to do something. At the very least, we want their cooperation or their buy-in to something. And so best that we think from their perspective. And we find often on our writing programs that we do, I mean, we've done many thousands of writing programs now with organizations, and just that one piece of advice, even if we don't tell them anything else about plain language, and we just say, think about the person you're writing to, jot down a few things about them. Now look at what you've written. Do they match? And it's often night and day for, someone hearing that, like, oh my goodness. So yes, we've got very matching philosophies on that. And Yeah. Unsurprisingly, I guess, because what we are both about is helping organisations to change and to get behaviour change. So, yeah.
I'm not sure about your work with leaders, but my work is leaders are very busy. And when you brought up the idea of a persona, I could imagine leaders pushing back and saying, I don't have time for that. But I really like that idea of all it takes is jot a few notes down about who these people are and what is this. And are there some specific questions that you would suggest once they do that they should ask in order that their writing and that email or that memo goes out from a more reader-focused perspective?
Yeah, they're probably very similar questions to the ones that you would ask, Dawn Marie, but definitely we would be asking, well, first of all, we look at what do I want to convey, right? Because that's obviously that's very important, okay? But then we have to look at why should that matter to the person who's going to receive the email? Because as much as we need a why for writing, the recipient needs a why for reading. Because we know we've done, in fact, just last year, I think it was, or maybe the year before, we did an email study, a little survey. We had 126 people reply. And we asked them lots of questions about email. And one of them was just, how long do you spend on a subject line, or how long do you spend sort of deciding whether you're going to read that email or not? And of course, it's a fraction of time that people spend. So the why needs to be up right there up front in your mind, because that's then going to colour what you write. We also, in creating a persona, would ask people to consider what would be going on for the reader at that time. And if it's a change project, really looking at their degree of comfort with what is happening. And even if you don't know that, thinking how you would feel. And so that's, again, putting yourself back in their shoes. So, yeah, what they already know. We always try to anticipate what their questions might be. So we'll get people to write down, if you're telling them this, what might they want to know? And make sure that you try and answer those questions so they don't have to come back to you. So there's lots and lots of things, I think, but the minute you start trying to consider their perspective, what's going on for them and why it should matter, the questions will come naturally, I think. Yeah.
You know, I think that's really powerful. That the why question is really interesting, because I can imagine that some leaders are thinking, what do you mean, why would they read it? They would read it just because it comes from me. But there's a difference between reading the words and internalizing and comprehending them. And I think the question of the why is, why will they read it and it create a meaningful message to them versus just, I'll read it and not, and I won't pay attention to it. I think that's the power of asking that question before you're about to sit down and communicate.
Yes, I agree. We often talk about having purpose and empathy. You need to know your own purpose. You need to have empathy for the other person. And, you know, you said something very interesting just a moment ago, where you said people might think, I haven't got time to write a persona or a profile. And what we would suggest, if someone is embarking on a change project, there's so much thinking that needs to happen up front before you do anything and broadcast it. And creating personas then as part of the planning process is vital. And then, of course, for every individual communication, you've got your baseline of the persona, but then in that situation, you ask more specific questions, you know, such as what do they know already and how have they reacted already and what's going on around them and that kind of thing. But the persona for a change project, I would say, is a vital exercise to do.
I really like that idea of persona. One of the things that I get our leaders to do and teach and advocate for is what I call a change recipient analysis. And what that is an analysis that goes in and gets them thinking from the change recipient perspective. Yes. And so they look at who are the groups that are being impacted, what influence and what impact does their involvement have on the success? You know, if you want me to run a mile, then I'm going to be running the mile. And also the impact that the change will have overall. I think I like the idea of adding that piece to go, so what is the persona? What is the profile of that group or those individuals? And how will that impact their reaction and response to the change, and then subsequently influence your communication with them? I really like the marriage of that with that change recipient analysis piece that we already do.
Yeah. Well, I think it matches perfectly. So
I do too. I really like it. We've talked a lot now about reader focused and change recipient centric, and at least 3 times email has come up. I'd like to talk a little bit about email because I have some very specific viewpoints on email and the value of email and the risk of email during change. And I'm curious about your thoughts. So if it's okay, I'll share a little bit about my perspective on email during change. And then I'd like to hear what your thoughts are and how they can maybe come together a little bit. So I believe very strongly that during change, especially during change, the primary communication really needs to be active. Conversation really needs to be a chance for us to interact. And if I'm announcing or engaging in something that's going to change your world in some way, that the risk of you misinterpreting that through an email is just too high. And that's so primary communication needs to be, let's have a conversation and I get a chance to visibly see your response, react, and interpret it. I also get to check in at the time that I'm getting that initial piece of information that you're actually hearing it the way I intended and got the message that I want. However, I also believe that there's a real importance and need for email, and that it plays a role, and certainly it's not going anywhere. It's key. So I'm curious about your thoughts on using email more appropriately and to get it working for you more than against you.
Yes, well, lots and lots of thoughts on that. I think we're aligned, Dawn Marie, in that we always talk to people about first checking whether email is the right medium to communicate that particular message, whatever it might be. Is it better to get up from your desk and go and talk to someone? Is it better to have a meeting? Is it, so never just use email by default. So that's the first thing that we would say. I totally agree with you that when you are communicating something that is life-changing for people, if at all possible, you want to do that in person so that the appropriate, you have a greater chance perhaps of showing empathy and conveying a message really, really well and appropriately to that audience. So I 100% agree with you on that. We see that email can get a bit of a bad name, first because it is used inappropriately, so that's what we've just been talking about. But secondly, email is often just done very poorly. People write emails badly. And that means email gets a bad rap when the problem isn't the email itself, it isn't the medium, the problem is the way the person wrote it. And of course, this is what we love to do. We love to help people to be able to do this effectively. So again, in our email survey, I think we had lots and lots of responses about what happens when people send emails, when they don't get what they wanted from it. And sometimes it's radio silence. Sometimes people don't answer your questions. Sometimes people answer the wrong question that you didn't even ask. Sometimes they just moan and complain to their colleagues, and then you get this whole sort of thing, that was never intended. So that's what can go wrong. We have, we could do a whole workshop on this, but some really key things that make a difference to whether an email works or not is, first of all, what I mentioned before, getting very clear about your purpose and then having empathy for the person you're writing it to. And then some very practical things. Think about, what is my key message? What do I want people most to get from this? If they read it and then you say, what did you get from that? You want them to have, be very clear about it. So you must know what your key message is. From that key message, you can choose, or should choose, a very informative subject line. And this subject line is something that makes a massive difference to whether people even read your email. So you try and, if you can, you try and give your key message even in the subject line. So an example might be, instead of an email with a subject line that says update, you could put update, phase 1 of our transition project almost complete. And then okay, well, now I've got some information. It's not just an update. If you, instead of a subject line that said Monday meeting, you could put, please bring your updated policy documents to the Monday meeting. So they're like, oh, I need to take notice of this email. I've got something to do. So having that clear subject line, then making sure that your opening statement in the email reflects your key message. If you've got instructions, write them very clearly, step by step. So we see so many emails where people will start with a chatter. How are you? Something nice. Then they'll ask a thing. Then there might be a bit more stuff. Then they might ask another thing and a bit more. And people just don't respond well to that. They need to see explicitly what they need to do. And you are doing your reader a favour if you can, be very specific. Okay, so a little formula that we often use to help people with email is the word MADE, so M-A-D-E. So M stands for main message, which you can put in your subject line if you can, and then also in the first paragraph in your email. Then you're going to put the action that you want, because almost always you do want an action. And in fact, this formula really applies where you want people to do something. So main message, action. Then you're going to put all of the detail, hopefully not too much, but that's where the next most important information comes. And then only at the very end are you going to put anything extra if there is something extra. So main message, action, detail, extra. So perfect little formula that we've used for years now, and it works beautifully. So those are the main pieces of information that will make a very big difference when you write emails. So, yeah.
I think just the clarity of the subject line would be profound and make such a difference. And you had me thinking about how many times, because I'm guilty of how many times I do that. I'm guilty of, hi, how are you? And that little bit of intro, instead of making, the point right off the bat, I'm writing to you because I'm sending this email because, and then at the end I can say, I hope all things are well and all that. I've evaluated the way I'm going to do my emails from now on. So thank you for that. That was great.
Oh, you are welcome. I will say it's still good to have, a connecting piece at the start, but you keep it short and make sure that it's really clear when you're getting into what this is about. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So maybe say, hi, I hope everything is well. And then kick into I'm writing, so you make it really clear. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense too. Yeah. But just the power of the subject line. The other pet peeve, I have is that you get these email streams and nobody changes the subject line. So you've got, 10 emails with the subject line, Monday meeting, but now the email streams are completely unrelated or action items to Monday's meeting. And so I started the practice now of going in when I hit a reply and actually changing the subject line to reflect that this is the reply or the content of my email. And I did that simply for me because I would go searching for an email that somebody, and I wouldn't be able to find it because the subject lines were so vague now.
I am so glad you said that. That was the other thing that was right at the top of my head, and it is so important. So yes, if you want to confuse people and have them not take notice, just keep going with the same subject line. So perfect. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to change the subject a little bit away from email and talk about something else that I think where we're quite aligned on. In your book and in our conversations that we've had, you talk about writing with the end in mind. And that really resonated with me because when I'm working with leaders on change, one of the very first things I ask them to do is to begin to think about what does your organization look like when this change, these new behaviors, these new activities have been adopted. And the idea of writing with that end in mind is very similar. But one of the things that I've found as I get them, I like to encourage them to write their, what I call their outcome story, which really describes as concretely and as succinctly and as clearly what the new environment might look like, what kind of work people will be doing, the behaviors, what they'll feel like, maybe what they'll be talking about, any of that. One of the interesting things for me, though, is that the higher the level that I'm working with in the organization, the vaguer, is that a word? Vague? The more vague, the more the story becomes almost unrelatable. They start to use very large words. Effective, efficient becomes, thrown in throughout. Things like customer-centric and all of these kinds of language. And I'm wondering if you've got some ideas or some suggestions about how to help people use more plain language to make things more concrete and clearer for people when they're writing with the end in mind, or when they're creating what that end story might look like.
Yes, well, that's also another great big topic, isn't it? And I think you're absolutely right that people tend, the bigger the idea, the more quickly it becomes abstract. And yes, we really notice that too. I think one of the things that we do most, and this is, of course, us working with individuals, is we just keep challenging them and saying, what does this actually mean? And often with a group of people, it's amazing to see how often people will have different views in the same room of what it actually means, or nobody can offer an explanation. And they all laugh, and go, oh, we can see how ridiculous this is. So it's hard to give really specific advice here other than to keep talking about making things, something that you could easily explain to your wife, your partner, your daughter, someone who knows nothing about it. And go back. One technique we do like to use is the 5 whys. So somebody else needs to be challenging, or you can challenge yourself and go, well, I've just written this thing. Why should I care? And then, because it's that empathy piece as well, why should I care? And then when you come up with an answer, you ask that question again and again and again. And yet you usually elicits a much more concrete, practical scenario, the more you ask that question, why. We have lots of exercises too where we get people to actually look at what we just would call waffle words, and all the padding, getting them to have a look and go, well, what are the real words in this piece that are working for me? What are the words that are carrying the message? What words could I not strike out of this sentence? Because there will be many words you could strike out, but what are the actual words that are really saying something? So as much as anything, it is a discipline, and it's a discipline to actually look at what you've written and go, what am I actually saying? We do on workshops talk about avoiding noun strings, long strings of nouns, all put together that mean nothing. I thought you might ask something that would allow me to say some of these phrases. So just a few. Amongst my team, we often send around, someone will go, oh, here's a lovely long noun string. Of course, they're fun to read. So a material, process, structure, mechanical property relationship was one that we saw very recently. Another one-to-many job search focused case management service. So when you find that you've got all these nouns strung together, they are almost always signalling a difficult, dense piece of writing that is not alive. It's just not alive. It's dense and difficult. So using verbs in your writing, verbs bring life and action. And so, if people are just even familiar with those two parts of speech, nouns and verbs, and, favour the verbs, make it alive, make it real, that will make a difference.
Oh, I really like that idea. And it's funny that those phrases, I'm glad you mentioned them, because I didn't have any off the top of my head, but I've seen them many, many times. It's so true, all of these words. And one of the things that I connected with as you were saying that is not only to make it come alive and make it visible, but I was reflecting back on how valuable at that moment, having done the work to identify the persona, to go, will my frontline sales clerk understand this? What will she mean? And to be able to have that persona available as you are writing this really creates the value in some of that early work. And for that, I see real value in that. And I love the idea of using the words and creating the life, and using simpler words where they're more appropriate. One of the things I say to leaders is, if you're going to use efficient, decide what efficient means. And I do a similar exercise. I write efficient on the board, and I ask everybody to write down what it means. And I invariably get at least a dozen different definitions of efficient or effective. Those are the two biggest ones that I run into. Or teamwork is another one that, or collaborate. Those are some of the other ones that I run into.
Yes. And another thing that springs to mind is when you're writing a goal can easily become very lofty for an organization, and lots of those words that you just mentioned come into it. I think it's often a really good idea after you've written that to put, this means that we will, and then you can get some real life and action into that next bit, about what these behaviors will look like. So sometimes if the goal looks a little abstract, and sometimes it's hard not to make it completely, it's hard to get away from that sometimes if it's a big goal for a whole organization. And sometimes that's tricky. But if you can say this means that and translate that into behaviors and or benefits as well. So this means that we will have a happier workforce that can all go home at 5 p.m. instead of working overtime or whatever it is, so that makes it real. So the underlying question to all of this is, what can you do to make it real?
Yeah. Oh, I really like that. That makes sense. I can't believe we're almost out of time, Lynda. I have more that I could talk to you about and would love to learn about. I'd like to wrap up with one area. We talk a lot in the work that we do about the importance of storytelling and the importance of why. And we've talked a little bit about that today. And oftentimes the why comes with having to present data, lots of data. And I've been in lots of presentations where you're dying under the weight of the PowerPoint graphs of the financial data. Can you offer some techniques to our listeners about how to make presenting and conveying financial or other types of data more reader focused, more useful for that purpose?
Sure. Yes, well, I think the most important thing when you've got a lot of data to present is to see the data as a tool to be able to convey messages, to be able to tell your story. So many people think of the data as the story or the end of the story. In fact, they don't even think about story. They just think, usually the people who create graphs and charts are very at home with them. They love graphs and charts. I do not love graphs and charts. I'm a word person, but many people don't intuitively absorb the information from a graph or a chart. So this comes back to empathy, thinking about your readers, thinking about also whenever you've sat in a PowerPoint and been bored from, lots and lots of charts. But the biggest piece of advice, apart from having everything clear, not too many charts at once, very clear labels on the chart, a very informative heading about it as well. But the most important thing is to think about it as a tool and what the story is that you want to tell. And we see so many examples of people simply presenting the data and then someone else going, well, but what does that mean? What's going to happen next month? Is there anything we should do because of this data? How does that relate to last month with what happened after we'd already had the meeting? So there's always so much around it. And I think that is the story. The data is a tool. So changing your perspective on the way you look at it is probably useful.
Oh, I really like that. I like the idea that the data is a tool to help you tell the story of why you need to go forward, maybe with a change or something else. That's a really great suggestion. And it really shifts the perspective of where the data fits and even the way you would present the data, because now maybe you don't need or want any graphs at all. Right? Before we wrap up, I'm asking all of our participants in the conversation of change the same last question. If leaders could only take one action starting tomorrow when it comes to applying and using plain language, what action would you invite or ask them to take?
Put themselves in their readers' shoes. That's it. That's the bottom line, the most important thing to do. Yeah, to get.
Okay, so get themselves into what does this look like from the reader perspective? Get that reader focused.
Yes, absolutely. It's all that empathy. Everything we've already said, but that's it. That's the golden nugget.
Great. Well, Lynda, thank you so much for making time. And I know we're in quite a bit of a time difference, you in New Zealand and me here on the west coast of Canada. So I've really appreciated you making time for us. And I look forward to having another conversation with you soon.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much, Dawn Marie. There's, as you say, so much more we could talk about, and I've just enjoyed it so much. So thank you for allowing me to share.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation on change and discovered new ways to make your messages clearer. My thanks again to Lynda for joining me and sharing all of her expertise. If you found this conversation helpful, consider sharing it with another change leader. And if you'd like to see more of these conversations, let me know in the comment section below. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.